Ladies and gentlemen, it's Friday. It looks like we made it. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. I hope the sun is shining. I hope the birds are singing. Hope the wind is at your back. It is with great pleasure and excitement that today we welcome Dr. Randall Hansen, a healing advocate, educator, ethicist, and thought leader who is pioneering a healing revolution. Driven by a profound commitment to helping the whole world heal, Dr. Randall's groundbreaking work is redefining the way we perceive healing, particularly in the context of trauma, personal growth, and the intentional use of psychedelic substances and plant medicines. At the heart of his mission lies the ancient yet profoundly relevant concept of healing, derived from the Old English hælan, meaning to make whole. Dr. Randall's work challenges us to reflect deeply on what it truly means to be whole, to mend not only our physical wounds, but also the emotional and spiritual scars that shape our lives. He knows firsthand the struggle of living dual lives, one dominated by trauma-fueled fears, and the other filled with love, hope, kindness, and peace we all yearn for. Through his transformative books, Triumph Over Trauma, and his latest release, The Healing Revolution Diet, Dr. Randall Hansen guides us on a journey toward complete healing. While Triumph Over Trauma explores holistic and integrative approaches to overcoming the burdens of past pain, the Healing Revolution Diet introduces a revolutionary framework for healing through food, nutrition, conscious choices. Together, these works empower us to rediscover our true, authentic selves, the individual Dr. Randall Hansen, I left out a book in there. As I was reading that, I realized you have a whole trilogy out here. What was the other book I left out right there?
The middle one, Heal, the holistic practices. And that book led me into the Healing Revolution Diet because when I was digging into that one more, I realized, the power of nutrition in healing.
Yep. Yeah. It's been a wild adventure. It seems like, just a few, it went by so fast, but it seems like we were just talking about your first book not too long ago. You have been on a terror. You got 3 books in and a couple of nonprofits lined up, and you have an incredible partner in Mrs. Jenny Hansen over there, who's always probably your rock. And what an incredible partner. I'm so stoked that she's there with you. How have you guys been doing all this?
Well, I would have to say plant medicine for sure. I think you know the story, but I'll just remind people that with Triumph Over Trauma, I had not planned to write any of these books, and I was on a beautiful LSD journey, and for me, that medicine is more mind expanding than healing, just in my experience for myself. And I was sitting on late afternoon. The journey was just coming down, and I got this, again, digital download, hard to describe. It wasn't a voice. It was an energy. It's so hard. It's so crazy. And it basically, was, you need to write this book. Ran inside, wrote down the outline that I was given, and that became the premise of Triumph Over Trauma. And about 75% of the book is from that original outline that I got that afternoon. And then in that process, that as I was working on that, I realized, well, people that do psychedelics, that that's just one element of healing. We often do meditation, breath work, going out in nature, and then of course the food we eat. A lot of ayahuasca has the dieta that we try to follow a better diet at least a month before you go on a journey. So that led to Heal. And I was microdosing LSD at the time, and Jenny was like, "Okay, 2 books is enough. We're done. We're good." But as I said, then with Heal, as I was writing it, I just started reading more of these books about the food industry and the manipulation that's been done to the food and to us, and how so many of us are just completely unaware. And so that led to the 3rd book, the trilogy. And I can say I almost definitely that it's going to be a trilogy. There's not going to be a 4th book that I'm aware of at the moment. So, but yeah,
there's definitely going to be a 4th book. There's definitely going to be one. You say that every single time. This is the last one, George. It's the last one.
Well, part of the problem too is when I read some, and there's amazing books in all three areas, and psychedelics are books way above mine in terms of depth and scientific delving. But what I've discovered is that, my skill or my talent, I guess, is taking some of the scientific stuff that a lot of these writers just go down a rabbit hole, which for some of us we love as readers. Yeah, let me go down that rabbit hole. But for the typical reader, I could just see them looking at this rabbit hole and saying, I'm going to put this book down and maybe never coming back to it. So all three of my books, I love when a reviewer says something like, it's so easy to read or easily comprehensible, because that's my goal. My goal is to just get the information out there, and then I provide books and resources. If you want to dig deeper into, how sugar and insulin resistance and diabetes and all that work within the body, sure, here's a book to go, dive into that. But for me, I just want you to understand that if you're eating this much sugar, it's almost definitely going to lead to insulin resistance, and that then leads to all these chronic illnesses. So yeah, that's my goal. Like I said, right now I'm not, I don't have one on top of my mind, so we'll keep that. And plus the LSD is locked up for the moment, so no more books.
One thing I like, there's this pattern in all your books where it's not just your story, it's other people's story. And it's almost like you're writing it collectively, like sort of the collective unconscious is coming together to stream a message to the people that read it. And it allows for such a nuanced and like different dimensionality than most books. Like you have like perspectives from other people. And a lot of times you have people come in that'll work on a chapter, and like I think on some levels it's sort of the, if I sort of squint my eyes, I can see the future of books that I like. And it's like that. It's a community writing a book together.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting how that message seems to resonate. Like it has a deeper resonance when there's that many more people contributing. Have you noticed that as well?
I know, but I know you're involved with a series like that also. But I think it's true. I think, again, no one person has, the answers to everything. And the more we rely on community, the more sparks of new ideas and new answers to problems. And so, and for this book, it's so funny. I was talking to someone yesterday and they were saying, why doesn't everyone follow the Mediterranean diet? It's the best diet in the world. And that's, it's the opposite part of my book, because my book is, you have to find the diet. And I don't mean diet in the sense of restriction, but diet in terms of lifestyle, in terms of the food you eat.
Right.
You have to find what works for you. Yes, for some carnivore might work, for others vegan, but for most of us are in the middle somewhere. And you just have to find what works. And so the storytelling in the book I love, because all the storytellers went through cycles where they tried one diet, maybe it was a fad diet, and they lost weight initially, which almost everyone does on one of these fad diets. And then it stopped working for them, or they got a little tired of the restrictions. And then all of a sudden they gained some weight and gained some more, and they quit the diet. And then they kind of went back to whole foods. But I think so the bottom line of all these stories is, first, it's a struggle. It's not going to be something you just, today I'm quitting sugar and I'll never have another health problem. It's, it's a journey. It's a process, just like everything else. And I think in my mind, a healing and health journey, should be ideally going hand in hand.
Yeah, I agree. There's this Ariadne thread, I think, that runs through all your books. And I found it came to me after, it's coming to me right now, to be honest with you. When I think about diet and I think about the food we eat, it seems that the Ariadne thread is that whatever is produced in misery has something attached to it that promotes more misery. Like if you look at factory farming, like how can you eat factory farming and not be miserable, not feel miserable? Like there's something that's attached to that style of production that makes us sick. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the way animals are treated. I don't know if it's the people that are producing it. Like, I hate what I'm doing. And they imbue this hatred or this misery onto this very thing that you're going to, if you're consuming misery in any form, in any part of your diet, you're going to be miserable. And it's all around us. Misery is just being fed to us in this diet, whether it's in your job, in your food, in your lifestyle. Like, how can something that's being produced in miserable conditions promote anything but misery? Is that too crazy to think about?
No, I definitely know that. I 100% agree with that with animals, because think about us as humans. If we're squeezed into a tiny room and lots of people are there and some are sick, and we're starting to get a little, I'm agitated, my stress hormones start going up, and I want to, besides all the benefits of pasture raised meats, I think I know some vegans will obviously disagree, but the idea that they're in their pasture 1 minute happily enjoying life, and then next minute they don't know any better, versus the feedlot where they are for several months in these tight quarters and muddy, gross conditions, and given antibiotics partly to fatten them up and partly because there's so much disease there, they need to give them antibiotics to keep the herd healthy. I totally agree with that. And you look at the industrial farming where, the farmers are wearing hazmat suits, basically spraying these dangerous chemicals on the food. How can that be anything positive? And just by what they're wearing, dictates, well, if they can't even breathe it, why should we be eating that food? So yeah, you're right. And that's, to me, that's part of the problem. I was having a discussion a couple of months ago with a friend, and I said, almost everything in the grocery store is a landmine. And I said, I don't know why people don't understand that. And she said, well, we have a social compact. We assume that food for sale is something that's healthy for us. And so we don't even think about it. And it's like, wow, that was sort of a mind-blowing thing, because again, it should be, if we were in a healthy culture, a healthy society, then everything in that grocery store should, or 90% at least, should be healthy. But it's the reverse. Maybe 10% is truly healthy, and the rest are dangerous products that are making us sicker. Whether it's obesity, heart disease is going up, all these things, and it's part of that broken system for sure.
Yeah, it just, I know it's complex, and I wish that there was a simple answer to it, but this idea of convenience, and we've all got our lives that we're living, and we're trying to make good decisions, but gosh, it's so tricky to think about what you're eating. And and on some level, I got to think a farmer that's they're trying to turn a profit and feed their family. I live here in Northern California, and they just had this big help keep small farmers alive, Jay over here, and it's, you could see both sides of it. And both, two things can be true at once, right? So you see these people that they're doing pretty good on their farms, they're doing all right, but that's how they make their living, and some of them treat their animals good, some of them don't treat them that good at all. And you can see activists come in and are like, we got to shut this down. It's complicated, it's messy. And have you in your research found a way where, like, how do we weave our way through this mess?
Well, let me just tell you something funny that I thought about earlier today. Well, it's not funny. It's funny, sad, I guess. But, in plant medicine, we all look at President Nixon and kind of, do our fist shake to him, because that was the beginning of the war on drugs and the war on psychedelics. But he also started the war on small farmers, because in the 70s, the same time, he pushed his agricultural secretary to say, we need much more production of soybean and corn, these monoculture crops that dominate our farms now across the country and really across the world. And to me, that's not real food. And I know some farmers get upset with me about this, but to me, the heroes are these small farmers that are growing actual food for us to eat. Soybean, I just have to give you a really gross statistic that hopefully will maybe make people stop and think a little bit.
Yeah.
But on average, in the US, every person consumes about 80 pounds of soybean oil a year. That's about half a cup a day,
Oh,
because soybean oil is the cheapest oil. It's soybean production or crop growing is subsidized, so that's what makes it so cheap. And it's also in almost all fast foods, convenience foods, these ultra processed foods, as we call them. Sometimes it's labeled vegetable oil, which I think is bizarre. And then in parentheses, it says soybean oil. So think about that. Even a generation ago, 2 generations ago, we were consuming barely any of these oils. We were eating lard, we were eating butter, and now it's flipped, and now we're consuming that. And the other factor is the sugar. We consume about 150 pounds of sugar per year. So that's about 3/4 of a cup a day that we're kind of, pouring down ourselves. And I think what you said earlier, convenience, it is wonderful in some ways, but in so many other ways, it literally is killing us. You know, I get it. You're working a long day and you forgot to, take something out for dinner, or you don't want to cook because it's been such a long day. And there's that Kentucky Fried Chicken, or there's that Burger King, or there's that Pizza Hut, and it's so easy. The car's kind of turning itself, and I did that too.
yeah.
Especially when I was, kind of also. Part of that for me was when I was still not dealing with my trauma. Food was a comfort food for me, so that fast food, even though it was, was that guilty pleasure, even though I knew it was bad. And so I eventually had to change the way I drove home, because I still wasn't on that healing journey at that point, but I knew it was wrong. And so I had to literally say, I'm not going to take that route. I'm going to go this way and avoid those fast foods and force myself to cook. But I think, so many of these elements, even Alexa, or smart homes, which is convenient in
Yeah.
one way, but it's causing people to just sit in their couches and never get up, because tell Alexa to do this, turn the lights on, turn the TV on, do all these things. And so, yeah, the modern society offers a lot of benefits, but we've lost a lot of things because of that convenience.
Yeah. It's so heart-wrenching to think about, and there's plenty of blame to go around. Like we could talk about discipline. The individual can be more disciplined and start taking the steps they need to live a better life. Ultimately, I think that that's the only thing that changes it, is each individual coming to terms with trying to become the best version of themselves, whether it's, okay, I'm going to take a new route home, or, you know what, I'm going to go for a walk today, or I'm going to do this one little thing. And I think if everybody just did one little thing better, then the world would begin to heal on its, heal through us on some level. What's your take? Does that seem like a decent strategy, or what are some other strategies that you see moving through here?
Yeah, I love that strategy, because whether it's a healing journey, a health journey, or both,
Yeah.
It's overwhelming at times. You're looking like,
Yeah.
well, how do I become that better person, that better me, or how do I find myself sometimes, or how do how do I face that trauma that I know I had when I was 8, but I refuse to look at it because I'm so scared. And it's just one step. You don't have to face that trauma today. You can start today by looking at an article or reading something from Gabor Mate about trauma and how to look at it. And so, to me, it's one step. Same thing with diet. You don't have to totally start cooking from scratch tomorrow and learning how to cook and all that. But you can say, okay, well, tomorrow I'm going to skip sodas altogether. One step, one tiny little thing. Tomorrow I'm going to try to reach out to a friend that I cut off because of the election, and now I'm kind of like, I shouldn't have done that. But just little steps. it drives me crazy a little bit, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, George, because you are the man. But sometimes when I see some of these positivity memes, whether on LinkedIn, social media somewhere, on one hand, I know what they're trying to say, like, live better today. And be kind today. And I believe the philosophy, but when you're in the midst of trauma, you look at that and I say, F you, I can't be positive today. I'm dealing with, I am struggling. So I walk that line, I want to, I love the positivity messages, but I always say, I don't think we can get to kindness or true positivity until we work through what we've been dealt. And again, the more and more I look at the research, the more and more I hear all these stories, the more I just know that every single one of us has experienced trauma in a wide range of things, and we all have something to get over. And it's hard because especially if you don't remember it, it's like, well, I don't have any trauma. And it's like, well, maybe the first step is sitting in that, just sit in that. Do you really not have any trauma? And then you'll say, oh, well, my dad got the belt out too many times when I was a kid, and sometimes he seemed like he was enjoying it too much. But that's just normal. That's just, or sometimes he locked me in my room, like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, this is trauma. Whether you've normalized it or not, this is something you need to look at. And I think so. Yeah, I think it's just. I love what you said. Finding a way each day, making some progress on healing yourself, improving yourself, finding yourself, living a better life.
Yeah. I don't think you're wrong at all. I think what you're saying in so many of the conversations I've had and so many of the cool books that I've read in this time we're going through is like this evolution of awareness. And it's this awareness that, maybe you can't ever really heal the trauma. You can just sort of be aware of it, and it's so easy to get angry. Like I get angry, upset all the time. I look back at stuff and I'm like, I can't believe that happened, and then I start feeling bad about myself. Like, well, you're a grown person, man. What's wrong with you? Worried about something like that, and I start getting mad. But then you realize that anger still serves a purpose. Like maybe you should, maybe the idea of forgiveness is not the right word. Maybe the idea of being angry is what allows you to set the boundaries so it never happens again. Maybe we just don't have the linguistic pathways we need. Like maybe pretty soon these ideas of like forgiveness and anger are going to be like folk psychology. Like they're just sort of like babble words. Like they don't really, they're so like, you can manipulate them to mean whatever they want. And like, it's just so amalgamous. It's like, it's not quite getting us to where we need to be. We don't have a clear linguistic pathway. And I think plant medicine, be it LSD or psychedelics, allows us to actually not have the words for the situation, but to see it clearly. And that's when we start moving into a better place, and you can see moving out of the medical container, moving out of trauma, like you talk in your book, Triumph Over Trauma, isn't so much of giving forgiveness to or letting go. It's just a matter of understanding the pattern in a way that we haven't seen it before. It's like that reticular activating system. When you buy a new car, you see that car everywhere. You get a new shirt, everyone's wearing that shirt. Like, I didn't see that shirt 2 days ago, but now I see it everywhere. It's the same thing with those things in your life. Once you begin to see these traumas, you're like, holy crap. My dad got that belt out way too much. And you know what? I love it when I hurt people. Oh my God. What's wrong with me? No, what's wrong with your dad? What's wrong with my family? It takes a while to start going, okay, just take a deep breath. Is that epigenetics? Is it in my genes? I'm not sure. But the fact that you're aware of it is a giant step in becoming a way better individual. And if you are aware of these things that are happening to you, congratulations. It's not easy. It's never going to be easy, but like you're moving in the right path. You're moving on the right road. So I think I think we're just beginning to get to the ideas of language that can help us, man. And I see it in the books, man. I see it in a lot of the work you're doing, like this unlifting the veil and beginning to see things or feel things in a way that hasn't. What's your take on that? Do you think we're moving into a world that's a more, I don't know, meaningful and purposeful? I mean, a lot harsher maybe, but more meaningful and purposeful?
Wow. Whew, I have missed your question. I do think that especially plant medicines can lift that veil and make you see things. To me, I think I've told you this before, but one of my psychedelic experiences, the biggest takeaway, and probably some people hearing this will say, this sounds really stupid, but the biggest takeaway was this word just hit me for the last, again, hour of my journey: perspective.
Mm.
And I think that's part of what not just plant medicine, but healing is about, is looking at things from multiple perspectives. So typically we are just so mono-focused. This is my life. This is what's happened to me. Nothing else, and when we can take a step back from our own egos and our own issues and see that there are other viewpoints, other perspectives. And so that I think is also what I've been trying to do in these books, because again, back to the food issue, people think that, that Big Mac is fine for me, or that, that frozen pizza or whatever. And without realizing that we've been, I don't want to say brainwashed, but kind of brainwashed in that sense. And we do need to lift that veil. And I think it is slowly lifting. I'm curious to see what happens over the next couple of months, with RFK and what might happen there. I'm just glad that health and healing is becoming more into the mainstream, because we do need to wake some people up, whether it's about the trauma they lived or and we know certain foods add to mental health problems. So we have both the trauma affecting mental health, and we have our food that we're eating affecting mental health. And, it's literally a ticking time bomb unless we do take these steps. And so I love when I talk to you, because I sometimes get down. No, because sometimes I get, really down on it. It's like, no one's listening, and why aren't we waking up? And there's another fast food company with record profits. It's like, whoa, no, that's not where we should be going. And I think that the other cool connection for me between psychedelics and food is the nature component, that we are so disconnected from nature. You ask kids, where does spinach come from? Oh, Walmart, or, whatever. It's like, well, no, there was a farm behind there somewhere. And same thing with adults too. We just are so disconnected from nature. And so plant medicines bring us back there. Food, healthy foods, I'm a big proponent. I would love if everyone in the US grew at least some of their own food. Even in apartments, you could have a little window or a little hydroponic system. And again, just realizing that just like us, there's this seed that starts out small, it's struggling, it needs support, and then it grows into something, and eventually we can harvest it, and it goes into our bodies with these nutrients. And it's just a wonderful cycle that also kind of reflects our cycle as humans. And so, I am hopeful, but there are days where it's like I feel I'm in an echo chamber, or in a vacuum, maybe is a better word, where it's just nothing. I say, hey, let's change our ways here or there, and it's like, no, I don't hear any response. So.
Yeah, I hear you. It's when I think of echo, I read a really cool koan yesterday, or something along those lines, that says, when you yell into a canyon and you hear an echo, is that the sound of your own voice coming back to you, or is that the sound that you're never alone, or something like that? I could say it better, but like, it's a beautiful thing to think about perspective. Back what you were
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me.
No, I love that. I've heard that
Something like that.
saying. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't. How much of it, like, and maybe this question is not as. Sometimes the question I ask myself is like, how much of this is by design? It seems on some level there's just so much momentum behind the factory farming. There's so much money behind the centralization, and you start reading these ideas of, if you look at maybe like an authoritarian model where, okay, if we own the rights to production, then we can make sure that everybody has enough. But in order to do that, you have to exclude so many people. You have to get rid of so much stuff. You have to cut so many deals that your end result is not that great. Like, is this something that's just been ongoing, or, is this a problem we've been trying to fix since, government started? Or what's your thoughts on centralization and
Oh,
quality?
wow. Yeah. I mean, we could probably spend the rest of the podcast on that. but yeah, if we, obviously people were, looking at foods and diets and things like that over the years, but in the US especially, we can look at a timeline where the first big crack was sugar industry, where the sugar
Yeah.
industry is a small industry, small number of companies, but they are a massively powerful lobby, and they have funded research. In fact, there's a famous one, the Harvard research one,
Yeah.
where it came out, oh gee, there's no impact, no, sugar has no health concerns, funded by the sugar industry. I wonder how that
Imagine that.
happened. Yeah. But so our downfall started, I think, accidentally, because in some ways, because yes, before in culturally we had the military industrial complex, and that's a whole other story. But in the 50s, President Eisenhower, who's sort of maybe one of the tipping points of that, got a heart attack while he was president. And heart disease was not that common back then. And in fact, for the decades and decades and centuries before that we have records, it was a pretty minor health issue. Bigger health issues were communicable diseases, typhoid or
Yeah.
flus and things like that. But so he had this heart attack, and the country went crazy. How could this military leader, president, strong man, get have a heart? And one researcher who bullied his way through, Ansel Keys, determined that fat was what caused Eisenhower's heart attack, heart disease. And so that became this rallying cry. We need to get rid of the fat in our diets. And the funny part is, we look back at this research today, he did a couple weird things. And again, it could be conspiracy. There's no evidence linking the sugar industry to this, but what he did was he took sugary foods like desserts, pastries, things like that as one category, but then he put sugary beverages as a totally separate category. And then he lumped all fat together: margarine, butter, vegetable oils. And so if you look at that, the research is skewed in that way, and it favors sugar over fat. And so that became our downfall. And the sugar industry, of course, loved it, whether they were involved or not. They took that and they pushed that research, and that led to changes in dietary recommendations from the U.S. government. We had the food pyramid, which is
Right.
so
Inverted.
wrong. Yeah, so wrong. And they've revised that to the food plate, and it's still wrong. And we had all these myths that developed during this time, and some of it's so yeah, I kind of walk in the middle of this line where people on this side say total conspiracy, these systems were in place to control us and manipulate us and break us in some ways, which we're
Yeah.
seeing today. And the other hand, it's like, no, part of it started maybe innocently and based on wrong research. And so I kind of like, well, I think there's a little bit of both there, because
Yeah.
there's no question. I think you said this earlier. There's no question that profits dominate. And again, yes, it's a capitalistic society, so yeah, profits, but not to the degree of profits over the health, the livelihood, the longevity of people. And that's what it's become. We still sell low fat, no fat stuff today, and I don't understand it, because we've disproved that in the about 15 years ago. We had a definitive study that said there's no connection of saturated fat with heart disease. And yet today we still have this no fat, low fat stuff. And if you look at the ingredients of a full fat yogurt versus a no fat yogurt, the full fat yogurt, basically the only ingredient is dairy, is the enzymes. And then in a non-fat, it's going to have of course, the dairy, but it's going to have several chemicals that might have even a seed oil or something like that, because you have to make up for the fat. And so plain yogurt, full fat yogurt has one ingredient, and that non-fat yogurt probably has 8 or 10 ingredients. And so we just keep manipulating the food. And back to your earlier question too, the number one thing you can do also is just start eating real foods, the actual ingredients. Eat an apple rather than apple juice or apple pie or some other element of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I can't help but just think about how lucrative it must be for a company that's going to sell milk to be like, okay, let's sell this gallon of non-fat milk for the same price, and then we'll take all the fat out of that milk and sell some dairy whip over here. Now we're selling 2 products for the price of one. We're going to double our profits. And guess what? Non-fat's great for you. Like, you can just see the sort of pigs at the trough. You know what I mean? Like, look at these guys.
Yeah.
Like, how dare you?
Well, that's the same thing with high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah.
It was a byproduct.
Yep.
And they're like, whoa, we can make more money by selling this byproduct that's, and we've now discovered that high fructose corn syrup is probably the worst sugar out there. It dramatically affects our liver, especially in the amount that we're consuming, and leads to gut dysfunction. And but companies love it. It's like, yeah, and it's probably, and because corn is also subsidized, so it's a triple. It's not only so the product is cheap, they can make ethanol and other things out of it, and in the byproduct they can sell the high fructose corn syrup. And so it's a win-win-win for these companies, and we pay the price.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, how long can that go? I guess we're in this sort of lab experiment where we're like, okay, how long can we just care about profits? Like how long can it go? Well, I guess it can go as long as until the rats die. I guess it can go that long. Like that's like seems to be what's happening. Like, yeah, this is all great for us, but yeah, the rats are looking kind of dead and fat and dying over there. Well, still easier. At what point in time does it not become easier? I mean, are we seeing that now? Like, do you really want to have the castle and look out and just see a wasteland? I don't understand how the people at the very top cannot care at all. Like, I think, and this is a bold statement, probably going to be wrong. People probably get mad at me for saying this, but I think if you're at a Fortune 500 company and you're a CEO, you hate people. On some level, you do not care about people or humanity. You care about profits. And maybe that's written into the charter. Maybe that's written into, I must make money for the shareholders. But I think a lot of these people, they may not pay the price for it, but their kids will. And I don't think they see that yet. Like, you may get out making tons of money, but your kid is part of this giant experiment and you're making the world worse. Like, I don't understand why people aren't willing to stand up and fight and maybe give up some of these things that, walk away from this corporate job where you're hurting people. They won't do it, Randall. Like, people won't do it. They won't walk away.
I know. And to that point, I won't name the company or the CEO, but CEO of one of the cereal companies, which they shouldn't exist, period, because of all the sugar in
Right.
those. But anyway, someone asked him a question about food insecurity, which is again something that we should not have in a country that is as rich, quote unquote, as we
Right.
are in this country. And so someone asked him, well, what can your company do about food insecurity? And he basically said, well, our cereal is so cheap they should just eat cornflakes for dinner. And it's like, whoa! It's like, oh, are you eating cornflakes for dinner? You know, and so yeah, I think there's this hubris. I think there's maybe maybe there is either a self hatred or a hatred for people, or like you said, I mean, it's definitely written into the compact of these companies
Right.
because short term everything is as long as we make the
Right.
quarterly profit, quarterly share prices, all these things. And I don't know what the end result is, but I think there needs to be a balance with profits and ethical decision making. That you can still make. I mean, look at all these. Like in my I live in a kind of a rural area, and there are a lot of farms here, and I love supporting them that are growing things the right way, and they do have a love for people and a love for food and a love for the soil. And that's the way it should be. They can make money. I don't mind if they charge me a little more for a locally grown
Yeah.
cucumber or tomato because they're doing it ethically. They're doing it the right way versus, a tomato you buy it at the grocery store that's been gassed and maybe shipped from South America or wherever and tastes like nothing because it's been the other thing that we've done with so much of our produce is we have manipulated the seed so much so we get that
Yeah.
perfect tomato or that perfect apple or that perfect whatever. And because consumers, do I want to buy an ugly tomato? No, I want to buy that perfect tomato. And then I
Yeah.
taste it, it tastes like cardboard because all they've cared about is the appearance. So yeah, I think I would love to see a system, and it maybe has to be grassroots.
Maybe.
One of my guys is like, we need a new just lost it
Boston
from the
Tea Party.
Revolutionary War. Boston Tea Party. We need another Boston Tea Party but with food. And I kind of love that idea. I told Jenny that I was like, yeah, let's organize a group of people to go in front of like Safeway and start burning the crappy foods. And she's like, no, I don't want to get arrested today.
I know.
But I think we need something like that. We need to get some more awareness that get media coverage or, beyond to wake up people to say, you have to demand it. Once you're awakened and you see, like once people start looking at ingredients labels alone, that is eye-opening. And you
Yeah.
see 3 sugars listed and 5 things you can't even pronounce, let alone know what they do. And so it will take, I think, a groundswelling of individuals saying enough is enough. Yeah, you can make your profits, but you don't have to be killing us in the process.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think about it because we see it not only in diet, but we see it in pharmaceuticals as well. That this sort of corruption and this tacit agreements between large corporations and the FDA, whether it's through food or through medicine. Like, hey, do we really got to trial this thing? Can I show you my company science over here? Look, these guys are from Harvard. And yes, they work for my company. And yes, they make $1 million each. And yes, they're in, they have all these tacit agreements. And it's just like, listen, if you can pass this thing, you get a job working with these guys later in life. And it's like, it's so transparent now. And like, I don't know, maybe, and it's easy for me to sit behind a microphone and say, why won't people do more? Because, it's easy to talk about things, but until you start living it and you start really making sacrifices in your life, you realize how hard it is. Like, and I get it. I try my best to have made those sacrifices myself. Like, I left a Fortune 500 company. Like, I'm not going to be treated like a piece of garbage. I'm not going to be treated like a number. And it's really, really hard to go through life without maybe that cushy insurance plan that you had, or, It's really difficult to walk away from something and take a stand when you're going to lose everything. And I know it's not easy, but I hope people choose to do it. But another route that we're talking about, like, and a reason why I think people at the very top should begin trying to change is like, look what happened to this United Health CEO, right? Like, this guy was just walking down the street. Like, I really think if things don't begin to change, if the corruption in our society is not allowed to be transformed, then the people are going to start standing up in ways that are, if my voice isn't heard, then violence will be heard. It's unfortunate, but that's what happens. Violence is a form of speech, the same way money is a form of speech. And if you're not going to listen to the voices, then there's going to be uprisings all around. Is that too crazy to think about, or do you think that's happening?
George, when I saw that story, a couple of days ago, I had similar thoughts, and it's sad that you and I both had those. It's like, wow, we live in a world where this is possibly a form of speech, as you said.
Yeah.
And I did I did a research about a month ago on healthcare CEOs, because I think the healthcare system is one of the most broken systems we have, along with the pharmaceutical, and they're tied together. And the 5 top CEOs of healthcare, just tens of millions of dollars in salary and bonuses. And so you have these people leading this lavish lives at the top, and then you have the people that can't even afford to go to a doctor, or got rejected from their healthcare for a pre-existing condition or whatever it might be. And I don't know anyone, and maybe I haven't been talking to the right people, but I don't know anyone who says, I love my healthcare plan. I haven't heard anyone ever say that to me. And part of that is, again, this focus of it's not preventive care, it's reactive care. And it's not, what can I do to help you improve your life? It's, what can I give you now to get rid of that symptom that's bothering you? And then we only have 10 minutes because, insurance says, we got to pack in, double the appointments per day for each doctor.
Yep.
And it's just a ridiculous system. And then, we could go on and on about pharmaceutical companies and the revolving door at the FDA, which again may hopefully change in a couple months. So many, I think about psychedelics, and I think about MDMA and how livid I was with that decision, because of the decades of work that MAPS Lycos went into that. Rick Doblin himself, his personal sacrifices, and yet some billion-dollar drug company can say, "Oh, we tested this for 4 weeks and it looks good, and people have to use it for the rest of their lives, but we're not going to test for that because we don't have time to, do a long-term study." And the FDA says, approve. So I mean, it is. It's, and we have to. I guess maybe back to your earlier point, we have to help people see that veil and say, "Hey, let me pull that down and look a little closer, and then I will make some changes." Because if that veil is too gauzy and they don't see it, then they're just going to live their lives complaining. But I do worry that complaining, that anger builds up and builds up and builds up, and there is going to be some eruption of some sort, whether that's words, violence, whatever it might be. And again, the food is making us sicker, so it's bringing us closer to that edge of anger. So I mean, it's like this crazy spiral of something. What would that? Well, you're the wordsmith. You tell me. But it's just it is. It's this these interwoven systems that are working together. Again, you can say how closely they're working together depending on how much of a conspiracist you are, but there is no question these things are all locked in together. Our foods make us sick, so we take a pill. The doctors are more than willing to do that, and and we watch TV and we see, oh, here's a new, you know, a new drug, Shushata or whatever. And, oh, what disease is that for? Oh, maybe I have that disease. Maybe I need this drug because look, the
Yeah.
people are dancing and singing and playing guitar and I can never
Yeah.
do that before. It's like, what? And so, yeah, I think we need to find a way to pull the veil. And I think one of those ways is definitely a healing journey, because the healing journey forces you to say what is beyond that veil for myself and then beyond to the outer world.
Yeah, I love it. It's sort of like a diet of the mind. You've been writing all this stuff about what your diet is and what you're consuming, but so much of that pertains to the inner dialogue as well, right? When you're
Oh, yeah.
and we've spoken about it. Like I got to take a different route home. The car turns itself. Like all this language that we use is. And here's another thing. I just coming to mind, like the same way you described that the illusion of a beautiful tomato, so too do we see the illusions of ourselves online. It's like we've slipped from, it's everywhere. Like once you be like, it's like I said, once you become aware of it, you see it everywhere. It's this illusion of everything being okay when nothing is okay. And to me, the fact that I can see it, like some truck driver turned podcaster, the fact that I can see it means that everybody should be able to see it. Like it's right there. It's the curtain being pulled back. It's not a wizard. It's some guy back there pulling handles, like, and we can fix it. Like, and it's being fixed. And like, that's the message that I want to get out is like, hey, everybody, we're all in this together. Number one, if we don't fix this together, it's going to get fixed, not from the top down, but from the bottom up. And that is messy. That is the Boston Tea Party. That is people being, blasted on New York sidewalks, like CEOs. Like, I can't imagine the amount of stress that management people are under in order to hit quotas. Like, that's not living a life either. Being fearful of not being able to live a life because you need to treat people like numbers. Like, but I think everybody's collectively seeing it together on some level. And my hope is that people will withdraw from that system. Instead of doing things right, they're going to start doing the right thing. I think that is a step in the right direction. Is that too Pollyanna for you?
No. And, I think I told her this story, but when I was on a road trip a couple of years ago, I visited a good friend of mine, and we hadn't been as touched personally, but we'd, friends on Facebook and all that. And her life seemed like this dream on Facebook, traveling to Europe and all these things, job going super well and beautiful kids, perfect kids. And then I met up with her, and as soon as I saw her face was drawn, and I went, whoa, this isn't the face I see on Facebook.
Yeah.
And she said, and almost immediately, the first thing out of her mouth, besides after hello, was, I'm getting a divorce. My husband's abusive. And I was like, this is the problem we have today that's causing so many other problems. We have this comparison syndrome.
Yeah.
And social media has made it so much worse, because I'm not saying we need to put on, I had to amputate my foot because of diabetes or something like that, but I think if we're only putting out some fake version of our true selves that we want the world to see, it's not being truthful to ourselves. It's continuing this lie that we are that we're okay, but it's also forcing all these people in your network to see this, to say, well, oh wow, look at this perfect life, and my life is falling apart. My spouse is leaving me, or whatever, and so or I'm not as smart as that, I'm not as funny as that, I'm not as witty as that. And so I would love if, and I know it's not possible because it's partly human nature, but I would love if everyone just, or we designated like one day a month just to say, today we're all going to be real. Here's the crap that's really happening in my life. Because I think when we share, I mean, I think the idea is, well, if we share the positivity, you know, everyone, you know, we're all happy. But I think when we share our doubts, our fears, our scares, it allows the community, back to what you were saying earlier, to come forth and help us
Yeah.
and support us. I mean, this is what I love about community, is that when we are struggling, if we're being honest, then, you know, rather than community patting us on the back and say, "Oh, nice job," and, you know, whatever, they can say, "How can I help you? What can I
Yeah.
do to, you know, get you through this?" And I think that's the part also that we're missing. We think we're connected to so many people because we have, you know, 5,000 followers or 5,000 friends, and then we sit alone in our dark office
Yeah.
online. You know, no, we're not talking. You know, we're not connecting with people that way. We're just putting out messages. We're not saying, you know, sitting around like we did earlier before we started the podcast, just saying, you know, how the heck are you and what's going
Yeah.
on. And so now I don't even know how we got to this point, but this is what you do in these podcasts, these conversations, which I absolutely love, because we go down these holes. And I think, what was the original question again?
You know, for me, like and maybe for everybody, it's hard to come on here and be like, my life is in shambles. You know, I feel like I'm losing everything. And here I am talking about it. Like, you know, we're told as a young person, no one wants to hear you complain about things. No one wants to hear your pain. Just shut up and deal with it. Like, why don't you take responsibility for yourself and become something better? You know, you're not working hard enough. But that to me just seems like a great way for, you know, to, I don't know, like, I think so many more people are going through so many more struggles. Like, it's really hard, man. And maybe that's not good content. I don't know. But, you know, maybe the only way to really help each other is just to be honest and be like, this sucks right now. What can we do? But I think
Yeah.
everybody's feeling it on some level.
Yeah. I probably about a year ago, people were, you know, started talking especially about this sort of existential dread that sort of hang over darkness, a heaviness, you know. And I think that is this churning of the changes we're trying to make, this,
Yeah.
and but this weight is pushing down, because like we talked about earlier, that these systems are powerful, and they don't want to be broken at all, because that's where the money is, that's where the success is, all the glory, the ego. And so I think we are at this weird convergence where we're pushing up, saying we need changes. You know, something has to break, and they're trying to hold firm, and it just gets this dread at times. And I think we just have to be honest and say, hey, I feel that, and I don't like it, and, you know, what can I personally do about it? And I think that, again, we have to just focus on ourselves. What can I do about it? Well, I can take a step today. I can start thinking about what changes I can do personally, or maybe someone else I can support who's in worse shape than I
Yeah.
am. And that's just it. It's just not only thinking about ourselves, which is important to do, because I think, like you said, I think a lot of times, I grew up in a household, same thing, sweep everything under the rug.
Yeah.
Don't let the neighbors know that happened. Oh no.
Yeah.
You know, we got, so that was like that was the old school social media. You
Yeah.
know, don't let the neighbors know, because we have to have a
Yeah.
pretty face. Everything's perfect in this house.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to break that first, break our upbringing. You know, I see, been doing this reading about abuse, and mm, it's it's so hard in almost any household, but this commonality that either the person feels like the family won't believe them if they bring up that they'd been abused, or that they believe the perpetrator who says, I will kill you or your family if you tell, or they believe they somehow brought it upon themselves. And I just wish, there was, and as we talked about earlier, and of course, I know that cycle of abuse goes back and back and back, because probably that
Yeah.
perpetrator was abused.
Right.
But I just wish there was some way we could tell all children, like, A, it's not your fault, and B, if your parents don't believe you, find somebody else, an aunt, an uncle, a teacher, somebody, because that, these things just spiral down to addiction and suicide and so many other things that don't need to be, but are, because we are still so broken. We haven't found a way to break those generational cycles. I think we haven't talked in a while, but one of the things I did this year was really do some integration with my dad, because
Mm.
it had been on my mind when I was writing this third book.
Yeah.
And I, maybe for the first time in my life, had some compassion for him, because I started looking back at his mother and the relationship he had with her. And I don't know how it was as a child, but as an adult, they went at it. I mean, they went at it like cats and dogs sometimes, just arguing, screaming at each other. And I was like, okay, well, I now have compassion for my dad, because I see he probably had that growing up. And so that was the skill he learned. Well, to be the parent, you got to scream and you got to get the belt out and and it's like, no, you got to break that cycle. You have to find a way to do that. And I guess I'm lucky. I feel like I've finally done that. But it takes work to do that, and it takes understanding that it doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to be as our parents were, or whatever family members or foster care, or however we were raised. We can fight that, but it's going to take work to do that, because it's been ingrained in our system, ingrained in our soul.
Yeah. It's sort of like, when I think back to some things in my life and some maybe unresolved anger that I have, it's like the longer you carry that anger, it just becomes like tempered steel in a way. You know what I mean by that? Like it just becomes
Oh yeah.
sharper and you can wield it in a way. And then you start feeling like, man, I kind of like this thing. Like I'm never going to apologize to them. Or you know what? I'm never going to forgive those people, man. They don't deserve it. And you know what? I'm not going to let my kids see them. How about that? I wonder how that feels for them. You know what? Like I hope they understand how they have to live with these choices they made that hurt me. I hope they understand that I see what they did. They let this abuser abuse me, and then they held a guilt trip over them for 20, 30 years, and they got stuff out of it, but not me. Like it's so, it's on one level, it's so exhausting, but on the other level, it's like, what do you do with that? Like, what do you do with these sort of betrayals that happen to you that you're not willing to give up? Man? I'm like, how do you move through that?
Well, I see the outcome of that. I see the outcome everywhere. I mean, we are kind of an angry people right now. I mean,
Yeah.
and it does take a lot of effort. You're right. I mean, to hold that grudge, or to hold that, you're expending energy that you could be using
Yeah.
to love, to nurture, but I don't know. Sometimes that negative stuff takes precedent. I'm not sure. Again, maybe that's something weird about our human nature that we need to discover. But I do. I see that. I see that outcome. Whether it's people driving. I just saw this post that I was a volunteer firefighter, so I like to follow my volunteer fire department here in town, and they just reported that two people passed their fire truck honking at them while the fire truck had its sirens and lights on, because they were going to an accident scene. And the fire department chief was like, what is going on with people? And I think it is what you're talking about, George, that it becomes a weapon that we kind of like. It feels comfortable. It makes us sometimes maybe feel even a little better about ourselves when we can, do that to the other person. See, I'm superior. I got them. And again, that's just that cycle of abuse. And, not to sound like a broken record, but I think it just takes work that a lot of us aren't willing to do. I mean, my healing journey started accidentally. I just bought a piece of land that I thought was healthy. It turned out was not healthy at all. And so I spent like, 6, 7 years in the forest by myself working. And, it was amazing because deer came up to me and turkeys and all these things. But the I didn't plan to be a healing journey, but it was allowed me to work out so many demons, whether it was, cutting down a tree, like, I'm going to do this, and screaming at myself or screaming at the people that did things to me. And I don't know I didn't need, 7 years probably to do that, but it was a pretty massive transformation. If you looked at me at the beginning of that time as someone who had a lot of self-loathing and bitterness and anger and frustration, to the end of that journey where, circling back to the beginning of this podcast where you said to meeting Jenny, who has been this light in my life. And I definitely would have never thought I was worthy of her before because of my trauma. And that healing journey got me there. But it takes a lot of work and it takes time. And some of us, again, a lot of us are working sometimes 1, 2, 3 jobs and just to support our family or ourselves. And now you're saying take, hours out of your day or weekends, or, where do I find the time to do this reflection, or, whether it's just a pure reflection and meditation, or whether it's a psychedelic experience, whatever it is, or even finding the time to say, like someone said to me, I don't have time to read ingredients labels. Are you kidding me? I hate going grocery shopping. I just want to be in and out in 5 minutes, grab the stuff I know I always buy. And so and that comes back to the convenience thing even. So we're kind of wrapping all this in a big bow, but convenience allows us not to deal with these issues. And I just, again, I guess my encouragement would be for people, we don't like to sit in our discomfort. We don't like to sit in our anger. We want to have action. We want to do something with our anger. We got a punching bag here in our home because after some trauma we had last year, both Jenny and I had anger we couldn't release, and it's like we got this punching bag, and for weeks we were pounding that thing, like just getting it out, and then finally taking the time to sit with that and say, okay, what was causing all this? And, how do we process it, and how do we deal with it, and how do we move forward with it? And now that punching bag hasn't been touched in like 4 months. It's, got dust on it. And to me, that's a good sign. That's a sign that we've made progress, that we're moving forward with that. But it's a commitment. And that's a hard thing for so many of us that have lives, have kids, have all sorts of obligations, and, dealing with sick parents and dealing with all these things. How do we find the time for that? And, but that I think is, you just have to make that commitment to do that, because otherwise it will turn into something that may ruin your life. If they ever catch this guy that shot that CEO, his life is done in terms of prison or whatever happens with him. And did he solve anything from that action? I mean, again, maybe awareness but I've seen both sides of it. I've seen, people just lashing out saying, this is horrible. This should never happen. And others saying, oh, this is the beginning of the revolution kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's just a weird time.
Yeah. I think it could go either way. It's, if we look at, I recently, there's a writer called, I'm going to butcher his name. I don't have the book in front of me. It's Byung-Chul Han. He's like this philosopher, this Korean philosopher, I believe. And his newest book is called The Death of the Narrative. And he talks about how we've moved from storytelling into story selling. And that, it's really, he just goes in depth, and it just blows my mind to think about the way narratives, tell a culture which way they're headed. And for so long, the storytelling has been hijacked in a way, whether it's, and it's mostly about division. It's mostly, man versus woman, gay versus straight, black versus white, yellow versus red, whatever. It's always seems to be a story about division. And if you can just pan back a little bit and be like, oh, this is the story that the people that are telling want us to believe. And you start thinking about, okay, it's just a story. Well, what's the real story? Then you can kind of start weaving your own story. But this thing that happened with this insurance exec, this thing has potential to really become a defining narrative of our time. Like, this is sort of the new, Bernie Getz, maybe, in a way. And I don't know what's right or wrong. I'm not a judge or a jury, but there is lots of stories you could tell about a man whose wife was not allowed to have insurance because of a guy like this. And I'll tell you what, a country could get behind that. And that could be a Boston Tea Party moment, and I think a lot of people in positions of authority should be very afraid. Like, a lot of people in government should be very afraid. Like, hey, the people are starting to get, the rats in the tank over here starting to act up a little bit, man. Do we got medicine for that? Like, what's going on? But I think it comes back to stories. And if we pan back a little bit more, what story are you telling yourself about where you're at? And maybe there's some truth to that story, but yeah, the power of the narrative, whether it's in trauma, whether it's in our diet, or whether it's in the life we lead, like, that story is something that you as an individual, you get to be the narrator, you get to be the person, you get to be the author of that story. And once you take that story back, don't let anybody hold the pen. Like, you hold the pen, you write down what you want to write down, and who cares if people believe it? Go out there and you write that story every day. Don't worry if it sounds good to other people. Don't worry if you may have made some mistakes in spelling along the way. Like, oh well, just continue to write that story and be the best character that you can in that story. Think of a person that's a million times better than you, and then be that guy or be that girl. It's the narrative is so important, right? No matter what we're doing in life. What do you think?
Well, and you just to go one step aside for a second, you just hit on something that every once in a while you should definitely be my publicist. you just hit on something really brilliant that I hadn't really thought about. But there are, we have been given so many false narratives.
Yeah.
And I guess that's one of the goals with these books of mine. Like, I thought when I wrote Triumph Over Trauma, I mean, when I started looking at the truth behind the stories we've been told, like, I grew up seeing the fried egg stupid commercial on TV.
Totally.
This is your brain on drugs, or the guy on the roof with PCP who was going to jump off the roof because he thought he could fly, and all this war on drugs and all these stuff, all this propaganda. And then when I started looking at the truth behind that veil, behind that narrative, it's like, no, there's a whole truth here that no one or very few people know about. And I thought psychedelics and plant medicine lies were bad until I got to the food part. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, these lies were even worse because, yes, with psychedelics, we're limiting people from maybe having some truly freeing experiences and healing. But with food, we are with these lies, we're literally killing people. And so I guess that is, one of the premise behind my books is I just want as close to the truth. And yes, I know I will have my own perceptual biases, as we all do, but my goal is just to say, let's just back away from this narrative of that butter is bad for you, or that eggs and cholesterol are dangerous for you. And let's just step back and see what's behind that, what caused that, and was it, and how do we break that narrative? But I think so. One part is there's a broader narrative that's been fed to us that we have to probably take responsibility and say what part of that is actually true.
Right.
And fight that. But then the other part of that, which I love, is we are the creators of our own story. And yes, there are a lot of other characters that interfere and or interact with us, but it's our story to tell. It's our story to live. and it's our chance to make the ending that we want. We maybe didn't have the beginning we wanted,
Yeah.
maybe we didn't have the middle that we wanted, but wherever we are today, we can take control of that story rather than letting the story just go on as us as a character in it. So I love that idea. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. It speaks volumes of where we are and what we can do, and the fact that, history is it's two words. It's his story. You know what I mean? So change your story. If you don't like his story, just change your
Perfect.
story and make it better.
Oh
Man.
boy.
Dr. Randall, I love talking to you, man. You've been really generous with your time. And you know what? It's so close to the holiday season. I think a perfect gift for everybody would be the trilogy. I hope they go down into the show notes. I hope they pick up the
I
trilogy
have
of
one of
all
them
your books.
here.
Yeah, hold it up so people can see it. Let's get a better look at
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
For those of you that are watching, get a look at this book right here.
Oop.
A little
Oh,
higher.
yep. There we go.
There we go. Yeah. The Healing Revolution Diet, packed with real-time information. Tell us inside, is there links to the website and links to the stuff that you are actually citing in there? Or maybe tell us a little bit more about the
Yes.
book.
Yeah. So the book has sort of follows my typical thing where I talk about the myths and I do a frequently asked questions about nutrition and diet and food, and then I just look at a timeline from how agriculture has changed, how raising animals have changed, how food production has changed. One of the things we didn't talk about, here's a great crazy narrative, is in the 1980s, the tobacco companies were worried about the future of cigarettes and tobacco, and so they bought food companies. RGR bought Nabisco, Philip Morris bought Kraft, and with that, they brought their little evil scientist. And we have research that shows that this thing called the bliss point, that they transformed food in such a way that it would be almost irresistible not to eat just one bite. And so I was talking to someone yesterday who said, I buy ice cream, I eat the whole pint. I can't stop at, one thing. And then someone else, talks about the joke about the Lay's potato chips. You can't eat just one or whatever. And it's true. They've made it that way. So the book outlines all that stuff. And then I talk about the research behind the as close as I can get, the truth about the research behind food and what the right macronutrients are. And again, my philosophy is, as we talked about, is you have to find the diet that's right for you, that fits your brain, your gut, and your mind, or your body. I'm sorry. And then it has these stories of people that have been on a healing food journey, a nutrition journey, and also oftentimes tied with a healing journey. And some of them also did plant medicine. So it's kind of a neat theme through all my books. And then I also have a bunch of nutritionists and naturopaths that submitted their best nutrition tips. And then, and in the back, I have all the resources. I have the articles. I have other books. If you want to delve more into metabolic syndrome, then I have Metabolical by Dr. Robert Lustig, who's probably one of my favorite doctors. And then other resources, other documentaries that report on these issues, like Food Inc., which was one of the first ones that really broke the ground and said, hey, you really need to be paying attention to what you're eating. And so it's just, so all three books, if they were going to buy the whole trilogy, they all have stories, they all have input from other experts, and they all have citations and references, whether it's websites, books, documentaries, so you can delve as deeply as you want into any of these subjects. And again, my goal is I want people to be reconnected with themselves and ideally reconnected with the world. And for me, the world also means being reconnected to nature. And so that's the goal, I hope.
Yeah, well, I think you're doing a tremendous job. What about, is there a condensed website? Does each book have its own website, or do you have a website where everybody can reach them?
Yes, I again, because maybe I wasn't planning the trilogy, so each book has its own website. But if they go to my main website, which is randallshansen.com, they can find the links to all 3 books. But if they wanted just a Healing Revolution diet, it is healingrevolutiondiet.com. And I post articles. They don't have to buy the books necessarily. I post a lot of articles related to the subject. Sometimes they're an excerpt from the book. Because again, my belief is yes, I would love to see. One of my goals with this new book, I'll put it out there because affirmations, have some power, especially if you release them out there.
Yeah.
So one of my goals with this book especially is I'm a big believer in local farms, buying local as much as possible. There's a great book by Dr. Josh Axe that says something like "Eat dirt," and the idea is there are nutrients in our soil, and it's best to eat soil from our own environment rather than eating soil from South America or wherever. And so one of my goals with this book is I would love to see enough copies sell that we could do some mini grants to local farmers and ranchers, especially younger ones, because we're seeing the average age of farmers in the US is something like 58 or 60. And so it's a generation that's, kind of ready to retire or wanting to retire, or maybe wanted to retire years ago, and they're still doing it. And so like I have a woman down the road that I get my eggs from, and she and her husband, probably in their 30s, and have this fledgling farm, chickens and pigs and some cows, dairy cows. And I would love to be able to, from this book sale, say, okay, here's the $10,000 grant. Oh, you need a new barn, or you need this. Well, here's the $10,000, no strings attached, just do it. And to encourage young people. So I have this, on one hand, I'd love to see the book sell, but on the other hand, I also want people to have access to this information. So I walk this line. I keep publishing articles on these things because I want people to be able to have free access to it. But if they have the resources to be able to buy the books and support this mission, I would love that as well.
Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, go down to the show notes, check out the articles if you can. If you're interested, check out the books. They're all great reading. They got a lot of great resources in there. And that's what we got for today. Dr. Randall, it's such a pleasure to always be with you. It's been far too long. Let's not let it go by that long again. I hope you have a beautiful day. Hang on briefly afterwards, but to everybody else, thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Aloha.